Tune into learning at resonance talks. Tune into learning at resonance talks. Tune into learning at resonance talks. Tune into learning. Tune into
Have you ever finally gone on that long-awaited vacation?
Oh, the one you've been looking forward to for months.
Right, exactly. Like, you know the one. You have been counting down the days on your calendar for, what, 6 months?
At least.
Yeah, and you've endured late nights at the office, those chaotic morning commutes, skipping lunches just to tie up all your loose ends.
Trying to survive until the trip.
Exactly. And you finally power down your laptop, you make it through airport security, you land in paradise, step off the plane, and then within 24 hours, you are just violently physically ill.
Like out of nowhere.
Totally out of nowhere. You get a massive migraine, or your throat feels like you swallowed glass.
Or even if you don't get sick, you just feel completely exhausted.
Yes, you find yourself just inexplicably immobilized. Like you spend the first 3 days of this incredibly expensive trip just staring at the hotel ceiling, feeling strangely depressed, heavy, and just completely devoid of joy.
It is honestly a universally maddening phenomenon.
Right, because it feels so unfair.
It really does. Because people invest so much emotional and, well, financial capital into these periods of rest. And we assume there is this clean binary switch in the brain.
Like we could just flip it off.
Exactly. We think we can simply toggle from relentless productivity to blissful relaxation the exact moment our zip code changes.
But I'm guessing it doesn't actually work like that.
Not at all. The human nervous system does not operate on a binary switch. It operates on momentum.
Momentum.
Yeah. And when you force a massive high-speed machine to suddenly slam on the brakes, the internal components tend to fracture.
I mean, I used to think I was just uniquely unlucky, or maybe I was picking up bizarre viruses on airplanes, you know?
A lot of people think that.
But it turns out this complete physiological shutdown is actually a highly predictable biological event.
It is entirely biological.
And so today, we are going to unpack exactly why our bodies basically betray us the moment we finally try to rest.
Which is such an important topic.
It really is. And to do that, our deep dive today is venturing into a space where this exact biological crash is not just a possibility, it's practically an occupational guarantee.
We are pulling apart a massive, comprehensive research dossier titled The Human Toll of Teaching.
Right. And I know that might sound really highly specific at first glance.
Yeah, it might seem niche.
But the objective here is to dismantle a very persistent, deeply ingrained societal myth about rest, using the teaching profession as our ultimate case study.
And that myth is the assumption that a teacher's summer break is this indulgent 3-month luxury.
Right, like a built-in, frivolous perk of the job that allows for endless beach days and catching up on sleep.
Must be nice to have summers off.
Must be nice. That is the phrase, right? We've all heard it. And if we were being completely honest, many of us sitting in year-round corporate jobs have probably thought it at some point.
Oh, absolutely. Maybe with a twinge of jealousy, even.
Totally. But we are going to dig into the hard biological, psychological, and neurochemical evidence that proves this break is absolutely not a luxury.
It is a strict medical necessity.
A medical necessity. And I want to make something crystal clear for everyone listening right now. Even if you have never set foot in a classroom since you were 18, the mechanics we are going to explore today absolutely apply to you.
100%.
The science of occupational burnout, the silent toll of emotional labor, and the clinical frameworks for true psychological recovery. This is a blueprint for anyone navigating a high-stress, high-demand career.
Whether you are a nurse, a middle manager, a software developer on a crunch deadline, or a corporate executive.
Right. Your body is playing by the exact same biological rules.
Because the lessons extracted from the teaching profession, they basically serve as a powerful magnifying glass for the modern workforce as a whole.
Like a microcosm.
Exactly. Educators are essentially the canaries in the coal mine for chronic occupational stress. If we can understand the architecture of their exhaustion and the biology of their recovery, we can apply those interventions to almost any other high-stress environment.
Okay, let me set the stage for what this actually looks like. Because if you want to understand the 9-month academic year, picture driving a car.
Okay, a car.
But you are not just cruising down the highway on a Sunday afternoon. You have the accelerator pressed firmly to the floor, and the RPM gauge is buried deep in the red line zone.
So you're redlining it constantly.
Constantly. You drive this car in the red zone for thousands and thousands of miles, over mountains, through storms, without ever changing the oil.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Right. So when June finally arrives, you are not simply parking the car in the garage for a few months of light maintenance.
The engine block is smoking.
The engine block is literally smoking, the timing belt is shredded, the tires are completely bald.
Yeah, that summer period is a mandatory, intensive engine rebuilding operation just to guarantee the vehicle does not literally combust when you turn the key again in September.
Exactly, because the structural wear and tear is systemic. We are not talking about standard end-of-the-week fatigue here.
No, we are looking at a profound depletion of cellular and psychological resources.
And to really grasp the severity of that depletion, we have to look at the baseline realities of the job.
Let's start with the statistical reality versus that societal myth we mentioned.
Yeah, we need to look at why these individuals are so profoundly hollowed out by the time summer actually arrives.
And the numbers from the 2025 RAND Corporation survey data in this dossier are just staggering.
They completely shatter the illusion of the flexible, family-friendly teaching career.
Let's look at the sheer volume of labor first. The dossier details something called the 360-hour deficit.
360 hours, walk me through that.
Well, the RAND data reveals that teachers report working an average of 49 hours per week.
Okay.
Now, let's break down what that actually means in the context of their employment. That 49-hour average is approximately 10 hours above their standard contracted hours every single week. And when you compound that discrepancy over a standard 36-week academic year, it equates to roughly 360 hours of completely unpaid invisible labor.
360 hours of invisible labor. If you convert that, it is essentially 9 full 40-hour work weeks.
Right.
That is over 2 solid months of labor that just goes entirely uncompensated.
It's massive.
And we all know what that invisible labor looks like, right? It is the teacher sitting at their dining room table at 9:30 on a Tuesday night grading essays.
Or the Sunday afternoon spent cutting out laminations.
Yes, or replying to anxious parent emails on a weekend. And the compounding effect of that is so visible in the exhaustion metrics.
It really is.
The survey found that 46% of teachers report that their job makes them too physically and emotionally tired to participate in activities in their private life.
And to really understand the weight of that 46%, we have to establish a control group.
Right. Compared to who?
Well, when researchers asked that exact same question to similar working adults across other professional sectors, only 13% report that level of private life exhaustion.
Wait, only 13%.
Yes. So educators are experiencing a level of total depletion that is more than 3 times higher than the baseline average of the American workforce.
I am really trying to square this with the way society markets this profession. Because the pitch is always like, teaching is great for parents.
Oh, always. You get out at 3 o'clock, you match your kids' holiday schedules, you have all this autonomy.
Right. So how are nearly half of them too exhausted to even eat dinner with their own families, let alone pursue a hobby?
The discrepancy comes from conflating the structural ideal of a schedule with the daily reality of the workload.
The reality on the ground.
Exactly. The exhaustion is not just a product of the hours logged. It is driven by the sheer intensity of those hours
Right.
and the massive infrastructural deficits compounding that intensity.
Infrastructural deficits? Like what?
Well, the primary driver of this occupational distress is untreated, long-term systemic stress. Consider this data point. 86% of school districts across the country report open teaching positions.
86%.
And 70% of teachers say their specific building is significantly understaffed.
Okay, so it is not just that the job is hard. It is that the person doing the job is also doing the job of the physical education teacher who quit in November.
Right.
And the special education aide who was never hired.
Exactly. The chronic lack of human capital forces existing educators to cover additional classes during their only planning periods.
So they lose their breaks.
Yes, and they are managing extra administrative tasks. And perhaps most draining, they are increasingly acting as uncompensated social workers, behavioral specialists, and crisis counselors for their students.
Wow, that mental load sounds relentless.
It is relentless. Furthermore, they lack the basic autonomy to manage that load flexibly.
What do you mean by flexibly?
Well, the survey noted that 3 times as many teachers as similar working adults report difficulty changing their schedules to attend to personal matters during the workday.
Oh, I see. I suppose in a corporate office, if you have a terrible headache or you need to call your mortgage broker, you just close your office door.
Right, or step away from your cubicle for 10 minutes.
But you cannot exactly step away from a room of 38-year-olds who have access to scissors and glue.
No, you absolutely cannot. The physical rigidity of the schedule, combined with the emotional volume of the workload, creates an inescapable pressure cooker environment.
You are basically on stage and highly vigilant for 7 straight hours.
Without a break.
Now, the dossier also makes a point to analyze how this baseline exhaustion is compounded by demographics.
Yes, this is a really critical part of the data.
Because this massive burden of stress is not distributed equally across the board, the data requires us to look at this impartially and acknowledge how gender and race create entirely different starting lines for burnout.
Let's look at the gender data first.
Yeah, let's dive into that.
Female teachers make up roughly 3/4 of the educational workforce.
Yeah.
And the numbers show they do the exact same number of contracted and uncontracted school hours as their male peers.
Okay, that makes sense.
But then the final bell rings and they go home. And the secondary shift begins immediately.
Oh, the secondary shift.
The data indicates that female teachers with children spend an average of 40 hours per week on household duties, family management, and childcare.
40 hours.
That is approximately 10 more hours per week than male teachers with children.
So that's 40 hours of domestic labor on top of 49 hours of professional labor?
Almost 90 hours.
That is nearly 90 hours of sustained obligation. I mean, for many female educators, the concept of a summer break is just a complete illusion.
It really is. It is simply a shift in employers,
Yeah, they stop working for the school district and begin working full-time for their household without compensation.
which means their opportunity for any kind of physiological recovery is severely subverted before the month of June even begins.
Man, and what about race? Because you mentioned that compounds things too.
Yes, we also see severe systemic inequities impacting educators of color, which drastically alter their burnout trajectories.
In what way?
Black and Hispanic or Latino educators are disproportionately placed in high-need, severely under-resourced educational environments.
So the infrastructure is even worse.
Much worse. These are buildings that often lack basic structural supports, functioning HVA systems, or adequate counseling staff.
Unbelievable.
Furthermore, the dossier highlights a significant wage gap, noting that Black educators earn an average of $4,400 less than their white counterparts.
Which introduces a massive layer of persistent financial stress on top of an already crushing occupational load.
Exactly. You are doing a harder version of the job with fewer resources for less money while trying to pay off the same student loans.
And the resulting stress rates probably reflect that reality perfectly, right?
They do. The dossier notes that in the 2024-2025 academic year, 56% of Black teachers and 66% of Hispanic and Latino teachers reported severe daily job-related stress.
66% experiencing severe daily stress.
This demographic reality fundamentally changes how we must approach the concept of recovery.
Because you can't just give everyone the same advice.
Right. We cannot offer universal one-size-fits-all prescriptions like, oh, just take a bubble bath and read a book.
Right, that's not going to cut it.
We must account for the varied baseline deficits from which different individuals are starting. A teacher dealing with severe financial anxiety, managing a structurally failing classroom, and shouldering 40 hours of domestic labor is entering the summer from a cellular deficit that requires intensive intervention.
Okay, so if we take all of this, the unpaid hours, the lack of basic bathroom autonomy, the demographic burdens, the constant vigilance,
That's a lot.
it is. What is this invisible weight actually doing beneath the skin?
That's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, I want to move away from the societal statistics and get into the hard science here because this is where the dossier gets incredibly illuminating.
Let's talk about the biological architecture of burnout.
Let's do it. The foundational concept here is something called effort recovery theory, right?
Yes. Effort recovery theory postulates that any sustained cognitive or emotional work effort inherently depletes our physiological and psychological resources.
Meaning it literally drains the battery.
It causes measurable internal strain. If an individual does not experience sufficient high-quality periodic recovery, that strain does not just dissipate.
It doesn't just go away if you sleep for 8 hours.
No, it accumulates. It compounds day after day, leading to persistent, irreversible negative health effects.
So the human body's response to the chronic stress of teaching is not just a subjective feeling of being tired.
Not at all. Yeah. It is measurable through highly distinct neuroendocrine and immunological biomarkers.
So it is in the blood, it is in the hormone levels. We aren't just talking about someone feeling a little burned out. We are talking about a measurable somatic condition.
Exactly. And to understand how that happens, we have to look at the endocrine stress system.
Okay.
The dossier breaks this down into two main axes. The first is the sympathetic adrenal medullary axis, or the SAM axis.
The SAM axis, what does that do?
The SAM axis is your immediate acute response system. It manages the classic fight or flight sympathetic activation.
Like if a bear jumps out at you.
Right. Or imagine a scenario where a student suddenly throws a chair across the classroom, or two students begin fighting.
Okay, yeah.
The SAM axis instantly floods your system with adrenaline and noradrenaline. Your heart rate spikes, your blood pressure shoots up, your pupils dilate, and blood rushes to your muscles so you can intervene.
Okay, so it is the biological alarm system designed to save us from immediate physical danger.
Yes.
But obviously, a teacher is not fighting off a predator. They are just trying to manage a chaotic room. So what is the second part of the system?
The second component is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, commonly referred to as the HPA axis.
The HPA axis.
This system is responsible for the slower, more sustained release of stress hormones, primarily cortisol.
Cortisol, the famous stress hormone.
Exactly. Now, under normal, healthy physiological conditions, cortisol follows a very predictable diurnal curve, including an awakening response.
What's an awakening response?
Your cortisol levels spike in the early morning to rouse you from sleep and prepare your body for the metabolic demands of the day.
Oh, interesting. So cortisol isn't always bad.
No, you need it. And then throughout the afternoon and evening, those levels gradually and smoothly decline so you can eventually sleep.
Okay, I'm going to guess that for someone experiencing that 360-hour deficit and the endless vigilance of a classroom we talked about, that beautiful, smooth cortisol curve is completely shattered.
Shattered is a good word for it.
What actually happens to the HPA axis when it is subjected to chronic, inescapable stress for 9 months straight?
When chronic occupational stress transitions into clinical burnout, the body undergoes a paradoxical and incredibly dangerous physiological adaptation.
Paradoxical.
Yes. The literature robustly shows that long-term burnout is associated with a blunted HPA axis response.
Blunted. Okay, let me see if I can picture this. Is it like a smoke detector in a kitchen?
I like where this is going.
Like if you constantly burn your toast every single morning, the alarm shrieks so often that eventually the battery just completely drains. Or someone gets so annoyed, they just yank the wires out of the ceiling.
You're spot on.
The system gets triggered so many times it just unplugs its own loudspeaker.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. The medical term for unplugging the loudspeaker is hypocortisolism.
Hypocortisolism.
The adrenal system becomes so fundamentally exhausted from constantly pumping out stress hormones that it eventually downregulates itself.
It just gives up.
It literally loses the capacity to mount a healthy adaptive cortisol response to daily stressors.
Yeah.
The battery is entirely dead. The person is facing a highly stressful situation, but their endocrine system refuses to respond appropriately.
Okay, so if my adrenal system goes offline and I am living with this hypocortisolism, what are the downstream effects? How does that actually feel in my body?
Well, the dossier suggests it kicks off a massive immunological domino effect involving something called cytokines.
Cytokines. What exactly is a cytokine and how does stress mess with it?
Cytokines are small proteins that act as the primary chemical text messages between cells, particularly within the immune system.
Like messengers.
Exactly. They tell your immune cells where to go, what to attack, and when to trigger an inflammatory response to heal an injury or fight an infection.
Okay.
A healthy functioning HPA axis releases cortisol, which naturally regulates and suppresses excessive cytokine activity, keeping inflammation in check.
But wait, if you have hypocortisolism, there is no cortisol to put the brakes on the cytokines.
Precisely. Prolonged HPA axis dysfunction severely disturbs cytokine regulation.
So they just run wild.
Without sufficient cortisol to regulate them, these signaling proteins promote sustained, systemic pro-inflammatory activity throughout the entire body.
So your internal environment is just constantly, chronically inflamed.
Yes. Concurrently, this prolonged state of distress actively weakens the numbers and the functional capacity of your protective immune cells, like lymphocytes.
Which means you can't fight anything off.
Right. Over time, this chronic inflammation and lowered immune defense shift your internal environment toward autoimmunity.
Autoimmunity.
The body begins to struggle to differentiate between foreign threats and its own tissues. This biological cascade directly contributes to the onset or exacerbation of chronic diseases.
This completely reframes how I view occupational burnout. I mean, it is not a weakness of character, it is systemic cellular exhaustion.
It is entirely physical at that point.
This explains why the research links teacher burnout to such a vast array of somatic complaints. The dossier lists chronic tension headaches, severe gastroenteritis, profound sleep impairment, and voice disorders.
All related to inflammation and immune failure.
And it explains why teachers seem to catch every single viral infection that circulates through the school. Their immune system is compromised at a molecular level because their adrenal glands have essentially given up.
The physical toll is devastating, but it is deeply intertwined with the psychological toll, which acts as the primary catalyst for the biological breakdown.
The psychological side, right.
The dossier spends a significant amount of time exploring the concept of emotional labor.
I think anyone who has ever worked a customer-facing job, retail, food service, hospitality, they understand the concept of emotional labor intuitively.
Absolutely. You have to smile when a customer is screaming at you over a coupon.
Exactly. But how does the dossier define it in the context of education, where the stakes are, frankly, infinitely higher than a retail transaction?
It breaks it down into surface acting versus deep acting.
Okay, let's start with surface acting.
Emotional labor in teaching is unparalleled in its intensity and duration. Educators are forced to navigate and regulate the volatile emotional landscapes of dozens, sometimes hundreds, of developing human beings every single day.
That's exhausting just to think about.
Surface acting is the practice of faking the required emotion. An individual actively masks their true internal feelings to maintain classroom stability, project authority, or adhere to professional expectations.
So internally, you might be experiencing profound grief over a personal loss, or you might be incredibly frustrated because a student is openly defying you for the 5th time that hour.
Right.
But externally, you put on the bright, patient, enthusiastic teacher face. You swallow the anger or the sadness and plaster on a smile.
Yes. But the research strongly indicates that surface acting acts as a massive drain on cognitive resources.
It takes actual energy to fake it.
Immense energy. It heavily spikes emotional exhaustion and leads directly to depersonalization.
Depersonalization. What does that look like?
It's a state where you begin to view your students or colleagues cynically, almost as objects rather than people.
Oh, wow.
It drastically increases the severity of burnout because the persistent suppression of your authentic emotional response requires immense psychological energy.
Okay, so what about the alternative, deep acting? Is that any better for the nervous system?
Deep acting is a process where the individual attempts to genuinely internalize and feel the required emotion.
Instead of just faking it.
Right. Instead of just pasting on a fake smile, you try to actually summon up genuine empathy or patience for the defiant student by actively reframing your behavior in your mind.
Okay, that sounds healthier, maybe.
While deep acting does tend to decrease the cynical depersonalization associated with surface acting, it is still incredibly taxing.
Because you're still doing the work.
Exactly. You are forcefully manipulating your own internal psychological state for 7 hours a day. Either way, through surface acting or deep acting, the emotional tank is being drained to absolute zero.
We have painted a pretty grim picture here. I mean, we have a nervous system that is utterly fried.
Completely fried.
We have an adrenal system trapped in hypocortisolism. We have a body flooded with pro-inflammatory cytokines. And we have an emotional reservoir that has been emptied by 9 months of relentless emotional labor.
It is the perfect storm for a breakdown.
And then June arrives, the final school bell rings, the students run out of the building. You would think the body would experience instant euphoric relief.
You really would.
But instead, the body goes into shock. This brings us to a really fascinating part of the research, the transition crisis and navigating what the dossier calls summer malaise.
Summer malaise. It is a profound psychological whiplash.
Whiplash is a good word for it.
The conclusion of the academic calendar obviously brings a sense of undeniable elation, but the abrupt transition from a hyper-structured, high-stress environment into the unstructured expanse of the summer months frequently triggers a highly uncomfortable adjustment period.
The qualitative descriptions of this in the dossier are so validating.
They really are.
They describe teachers experiencing this phenomenon where they feel entirely rootless, socially isolated, and immobilized by lethargy.
Like they can't even get off the couch.
Exactly. And the wild part is the contrast between their expectations and reality. A teacher will enter June with these massive, hyperproductive plans.
Oh, I'm going to do so much.
Right. They tell themselves, I am going to finally paint the house. I'm going to learn conversational Spanish. I'm going to write a novel, and I'm going to meal prep for the entire fall semester.
And then what happens?
Then the first week of summer hits, and they just sit on the couch. They cannot self-motivate. They sleep excessively. They binge watch television, and they feel a crushing sense of guilt about their own laziness.
And the critical realization here is the why behind that lethargy.
Right. Why does it happen?
We must stop viewing this period of immobilization as a lack of discipline or a personal moral failure.
It's not laziness.
Not at all. What they're experiencing is a severe physiological withdrawal response.
Withdrawal, you mean literally like coming off a chemical substance?
Biologically, yes. During the school year, you are operating in a hyper-stimulating environment. You are constantly triaging immediate demands, adhering to rigid bell schedules down to the minute, and interacting with hundreds of people.
Constantly on high alert.
Your body's being propelled forward by chronic stress hormones. When that sudden cessation happens, when the bells stop ringing and the demands vanish, your central nervous system goes into sudden decompression.
Wow.
You are physically withdrawing from the adrenaline and cortisol that have been keeping you upright.
So the couch lock, the brain fog, the inability to get off the sofa and paint the house, that is literally your nervous system trying to aggressively recalibrate from a 9-month adrenaline bender.
Precisely. And to successfully navigate this withdrawal phase without spiraling into a deep depressive state, the research emphasizes the absolute necessity of transition rituals.
Transition rituals.
You have to consciously and deliberately signal to your nervous system that the crisis is over and that the environment is now safe.
What does an effective transition ritual look like? Because clearly, just walking out of the building on the last day isn't enough to convince the brain.
It requires deliberate, symbolic actions.
Like what?
It might mean archiving all your work emails into a hidden folder so they are no longer visible on your screen. It involves physically clearing your desk, taking down your calendar, and packing away any visual reminders of the job.
Physical actions to signify the end.
And most importantly, it requires allowing yourself a predetermined period, perhaps 3 to 5 days, of intentional, guilt-free rest.
Guilt-free is the key there.
Yes, you have to intellectually give yourself permission to be immobilized, telling your body we are safe now, the vigilance is no longer required.
That makes a lot of sense. You have to proactively manage the guilt. But obviously, to maintain that sense of safety through July and August, you have to aggressively manage the line between work and home.
Boundaries are everything here.
If you keep checking your email, the alarm system turns right back on. The dossier introduces several psychological frameworks for how humans manage their lives, grouped under boundary theory.
Yes, boundary theory.
It categorizes people into integrators, segmenters, cyclers, and firsters.
Boundary theory is essential for understanding how to achieve actual recovery. It categorizes how individuals navigate the highly permeable lines between their professional and personal domains.
Let's start with integrators.
Integrators are individuals who blend the two worlds seamlessly. Their boundaries are highly porous.
Meaning they don't really have a strict line.
Right. An integrator will happily answer a work email on their phone while watching a movie with their children. Or they might do personal online shopping while sitting at their desk at the office.
Okay, yeah.
They do not mind the blur. In fact, they often prefer the flexibility it offers.
Then you have segmenters. I assume these are the people who build a brick wall between the two domains.
Correct. Segmenters maintain rigid, impermeable boundaries. When they're at the workplace, personal matters do not exist. When they're at home, they will not even look at a work-related notification. The two spheres are kept entirely distinct.
And how do cyclers and firsters operate within this framework?
Cyclers are individuals who alternate between periods of high integration and high segmentation, usually dictated by the seasonal demands of their job.
Ah, I can see how that applies to teachers.
It is an incredibly common pattern for educators. They are forced to be highly integrated during the 9-month school year, grading at home, planning on weekends, but then they attempt to become strict segmenters during the summer months.
And firsters.
Finally, firsters are people who disproportionately allow one domain to consistently interrupt and override the other.
Like work firsters.
Yes, in a high-stress society, this usually manifests as work firsters. Individuals who will always allow a professional demand to interrupt family time, but would never allow family needs to interrupt a workday.
Let's apply this to the summer break. During the school year, because of the 360-hour workload deficit we discussed, teachers are basically forced to be integrators.
You have no choice.
If they don't grade papers on Sunday night, they drown on Monday morning. But if I am reading the research correctly, Continuing to be an integrator during the summer is incredibly dangerous to their health, isn't it?
It is entirely counterproductive to the physiological healing process.
Wow.
Given the emotionally demanding, heavily scrutinized, and often traumatizing nature of modern education, adopting a strict segmentation strategy during the summer is mandatory to achieve true psychological well-being.
So they have to become segmenters.
Segmentation is the only reliable mechanism that facilitates what the occupational health literature refers to as psychological detachment.
Psychological detachment. That sounds like a very specific clinical term. It is not just the act of being physically absent from the school building.
No, it's cognitive.
Because I can sit on a beach in Florida, completely physically removed from my job, but still be deeply attached to it mentally.
Exactly. Psychological detachment is defined as the complete cessation of work-related thoughts, rumination, and emotional engagement during off-job time.
So if you're thinking about work, you aren't detached.
If you are sitting on that beach in July, but you are internally stressing about a new curriculum rollout in September, or you are worrying about whether a specific student is safe at home, you are not psychologically detached. Your mind is still at work.
And what happens if you aren't detached?
Without that true cognitive detachment, the effort recovery mechanism we talked about earlier completely short circuits.
It just fails.
Your baseline stress level remains artificially elevated, the HPA axis cannot reset, and the biological benefits of the summer break are entirely neutralized.
So the million-dollar question is, how do we force this detachment? Because anyone who has ever tried to meditate knows that just telling your brain to stop thinking about work is completely futile.
It's like telling yourself not to think about a pink elephant.
Right. If I tell myself not to worry about the fall semester, all I'm going to do is obsess over it. But the dossier provides several highly actionable tactics for enacting deliberate boundary work to force the brain to let go. The first strategy is tech disconnection.
Tech disconnection relies on understanding a concept called affordances for practice.
Affordances for practice, what's that?
The rapid proliferation of communication technology, smartphones, cloud-based grading systems, instant messaging apps has created a silent expectation of constant, unbroken connectivity.
We're always on.
Your personal smartphone, a device meant for connection with loved ones, has been weaponized into a conduit for chronic occupational stress.
Because the icon for my school email or my corporate Slack channel is sitting right next to my text messages and my podcast app.
And simply seeing that icon or seeing a notification badge out of the corner of your eye is enough to trigger the amygdala to instantly re-engage the stress response.
Just seeing the icon.
Your heart rate elevates just looking at the screen. Therefore, the strategy requires strict, uncompromising disconnection.
So what do you actually do?
It means deleting institutional email apps from your personal phone entirely. It means muting all school-related group chats from June through August.
Just delete them.
It may even require setting up entirely separate email accounts and browser profiles for personal use, so the predictive algorithms don't constantly suggest work-related content.
I can hear the anxiety from some listeners right now, but if I ignore an email from a parent in June, I'm going to have a massive crisis waiting for me in August. I am just delaying the pain.
That's a common fear.
But the reality is, if you don't disconnect, you won't have the biological capacity to deal with that crisis in August anyway.
You'll be burned out before the year begins.
You have to make yourself unreachable, which leads to the second tactic, spatial segregation.
Spatial boundaries rely heavily on environmental cues to signal to the brain that you are officially off duty.
Your environment matters.
If you absolutely must do some summer work, perhaps you are forced to prep for a new grade level or complete continuing education credits, you must designate a highly specific, contained physical workspace within your home.
Like a specific desk.
The rule is absolute, never, ever grade, plan, or read professional development materials in spaces associated with rest and recovery.
Do not bring the laptop into the bedroom.
Never.
Do not sit on the living room couch with a stack of IEPs to review.
The dossier actually suggests that during the transition into summer, educators should literally pack away all teaching materials, textbooks, and files into heavy boxes and place them in an inaccessible location, like an attic or the back of a garage.
Wow, physically hiding it.
You have to make it physically difficult to access your work. By creating geographical and psychological distance, you turn your primary living space into a protected fortress of rest.
I love the idea of physically burying the work, but let's be realistic. Sometimes work must happen.
It's unavoidable for some.
Teachers have recertification courses. Corporate workers have quarterly reports that bleed into July. If you cannot be a pure segmenter, how do you protect your sanity?
That is where the third tactic, temporal fencing, becomes critical.
Temporal fencing. Setting boundaries with time.
If work is unavoidable, you must restrict it to rigid, strictly defined, non-negotiable time windows.
For example.
For example, you make an ironclad agreement with yourself. I will only work on curriculum prep on Tuesday mornings between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m.
And what happens when the clock strikes 11:01 a.m. and I am only halfway through a lesson plan?
At 11:01 a.m., the laptop is closed, the materials are returned to their box, and the work ceases entirely, regardless of whether the specific task is completed or not.
You just walk away.
The work is abandoned until the next temporal fence opens. Temporal segmentation prevents the creeping, insidious bleed of work into the entirety of your week. It preserves the structural integrity of your leisure time.
Okay, let's take a breath and review where we are, because we've covered a lot. We have survived the initial physiological crash of June. We have enacted our transition rituals.
Right.
We have established tech boundaries, buried our materials in the garage for spatial segregation, and built temporal fences.
We've built the fortress.
We have carved out this beautiful protected space. Now, what on earth do we actually do with that time to heal the brain?
Because just resting isn't enough.
Right, because sitting in a dark room staring at a wall for 2 months isn't going to fix a broken endocrine system.
It certainly isn't.
This brings us to the blueprint for healing, specifically the drama model and the theory of self-complexity.
The drama model is a phenomenal framework introduced in the Journal of Happiness Studies.
The drama model.
It fundamentally challenges the simplistic, cultural notion that recovery simply means sitting idly on a beach chair.
So passive resting is bad.
Passive resting is entirely insufficient for repairing deep burnout. The model posits that leisure activities only actively restore our depleted cognitive and emotional resources when they successfully satisfy 6 core human psychological needs.
The dossier outlines these 6 needs using the acronym DDRAMA. I want to weave through these, starting with the first need, detachment.
We touched on this earlier with boundary theory.
We did, but there is a specific cognitive phenomenon at play here called forgetting fixation. What is that?
Yes, detachment is the bedrock of the entire model. It is the act of gaining profound mental and emotional distance from work-related thoughts. The concept of forgetting fixation is fascinating.
How does it work?
When you are deeply entrenched in a problem at work, you often become fixated on incorrect or inefficient solutions. You cannot see the forest for the trees.
You're just stuck.
When you successfully disengage from work during a vacation, it acts as an incubation phase. The distance actually allows your brain to subconsciously forget the stressful, incorrect pathways, allowing your subconscious to process the accumulated stress and eventually return with fresh perspectives.
And the research notes a very specific trick for achieving this detachment. It turns out simply staying in your own house makes it incredibly difficult.
It really does.
The data shows that people who stay at their permanent residence for their vacation, the classic staycation, experience significantly lower levels of psychological detachment.
Because you're still surrounded by your normal life.
You are surrounded by the laundry, the broken dishwasher, the neighborhood stressors. To force cognitive distance, you have to create physical distance.
You have to leave.
Even if it is just driving an hour away to rent a cheap cabin or stay with a friend for a weekend, leaving your zip code is a highly recommended intervention to force spatial detachment.
Once you have detached, you move to the second need, relaxation.
Relaxation.
This is not just about feeling nice. It is a conscious, physiological unwinding, a deliberate reduction in physical activation and sympathetic arousal.
This is where we trigger something in the brain called the default mode network, or the DMN. How does the DMN actually work?
The default mode network is a large-scale brain network of interacting regions that is highly active during wakeful rest.
Wakeful rest.
When you are intensely focused on a task, like teaching a math lesson, the DMN is suppressed. But when you lie in a hammock and watch the clouds, or take a slow walk without your phone, the DMN activates.
What does it do when it's active?
It is the neurological substrate for daydreaming, mental imagination, self-reflection, and original thinking. It is essential for cognitive restoration. But crucially, your physical environment dictates whether the DMN can activate.
Which explains a really counterintuitive piece of data in the dossier. It specifically compares different types of vacations.
This part is so interesting.
It notes that beach vacations, or slow-paced nature retreats, are strongly associated with high relaxation and DMN activation.
Because you're just existing.
But heavily scheduled tourist trips, the kind where you fly to Europe and march through a major city for 10 hours a day, trying to navigate train schedules and see 7 museums before dinner, those are frequently related to lower relaxation and severely increased fatigue.
You're just trading occupational stress for logistical stress.
You come back from the trip needing a vacation from your vacation.
It defeats the biological purpose of the break entirely. Moving to the third need, we have autonomy.
Autonomy.
This satisfies the deeply ingrained human need for self-determination and absolute control over one's own time and actions.
For educators, I imagine this is arguably the most critical need of all.
It absolutely is.
Because as we discussed during the academic year, they have zero autonomy. Their entire existence is beholden to a bell system.
The bell controls everything.
The bell dictates when they are allowed to speak, when they are allowed to eat a 15-minute lunch, and quite literally when they are permitted to use the restroom. They are highly educated professionals living under the temporal constraints of an assembly line worker.
Precisely. The continuous denial of bodily autonomy is a massive driver of psychological distress.
So they have to take that back.
Therefore, the summer break must be fiercely utilized to reclaim personal sovereignty. Engaging in completely self-directed activities, entirely free from external obligations or schedules, is deeply restorative.
Like what?
Waking up without an alarm, deciding to eat breakfast at 11 a.m. just because you feel like it, spending an entirely unstructured day simply following your whims, this fulfills a critical psychological deficit created by the school year.
That brings us to the next need, which honestly initially confused me: mastery.
Ah, yes. Mastery.
When I think of recovery, I think of doing things that are easy. But mastery involves engaging in serious leisure. It almost sounds like work. Why do we need to work to recover from work?
Mastery experiences are structured opportunities to deliberately leave your professional comfort zone and acquire new, challenging skills in a low-stakes environment.
A low-stakes environment.
For an educator, their internal sense of professional mastery and competence is frequently battered by systemic failures entirely out of their control.
Oh, like the things we talked about earlier.
Right. They are held accountable for standardized testing scores they cannot control, or they are forced to manage severe behavioral issues without administrative support. Their professional self-efficacy takes massive repeated hits.
So rebuilding that shattered sense of self-efficacy through an entirely unrelated domain acts as a protective shield.
It reminds them that they are capable.
The dossier gives examples like dedicating the summer to learning conversational French, taking up complex woodworking, mastering intricate culinary recipes, or training for a competitive athletic event.
Exactly.
You are deliberately broadening your knowledge pool and dramatically enhancing your self-esteem completely outside the context of your job performance.
Exactly. The psychological stakes are vastly different. If you are learning to build a dining room table and you completely ruin a woodworking joint, it is frustrating, but it does not carry the crushing existential weight of a student failing a crucial reading assessment.
Right. Nobody's future is ruined if you mess up a table.
You get to experience the joy of learning and overcoming obstacles without the trauma of occupational failure.
The final two needs in the drama model are meaning and affiliation.
Meaning and affiliation.
Meaning involves gaining a sense of purpose beyond your profession, perhaps through meditation, deep self-reflection, or volunteering for a cause completely unrelated to education, like an animal shelter.
Yes.
And affiliation is about social connection. Paradoxically, teaching is one of the most socially isolating professions.
People don't realize that.
You are surrounded by hundreds of bodies all day, but genuine, uninterrupted adult peer connection is incredibly rare.
So rare.
Spending quality, unhurried time with a partner, family members, or friends repairs the intimate relationships that were neglected and drained by the sheer exhaustion of the academic year.
It is a comprehensive protocol for rebuilding a human being. But the dossier also highlights that this is not a static formula.
Oh, meaning it changes depending on the person.
There are significant demographic nuances, particularly regarding age and career stage, that dictate which parts of the drama model an individual needs most urgently.
Break that down for me. How does a 25-year-old teacher's recovery differ from a 55-year-old veteran teacher's recovery?
The longitudinal data provides a very clear distinction. Younger teachers are typically navigating the volatile early stages of their careers, often while concurrently managing heavy family demands like raising young children.
Right. They have a lot on their plate at home, too.
Their primary deficit is basic physiological energy. Therefore, they benefit most profoundly from prioritizing pure detachment and relaxation experiences. Their bodies simply need to stop moving.
They need the beach chair and the DMN activation.
Exactly.
Whereas older, veteran educators need something entirely different to heal.
Yes. Veteran educators have usually mastered the basic pedagogical mechanics of the job, but they might be grappling with the existential weight of a decades-long career or facing severe professional stagnation.
They're just bored or feeling stuck.
The data shows they extract significantly greater vitality and life satisfaction from heavily prioritizing autonomy and mastery activities.
So they need the challenges.
They need to actively engage in new, complex challenges outside the classroom to fight off intellectual stagnation and cynicism. An optimized recovery protocol is a highly dynamic, individualized blend tailored to the person's specific exhaustion profile.
This idea of building a life outside the classroom transitions perfectly into one of the most profound psychological concepts in the entire dossier: identity reconstruction and the theory of self-complexity.
This is a huge piece of the puzzle.
Because society has a very specific, very dangerous way of talking about teachers. We constantly refer to teaching as a calling, a noble vocation, rather than just a profession.
And while that framing sounds complimentary, it is actually psychologically hazardous.
Really hazardous.
When a profession is elevated to a calling, the boundary between the individual and the job devolves. Your personal identity becomes profoundly, inextricably enmeshed with your occupational role.
So you aren't just a person doing a job.
You do not just work as a teacher. You fundamentally are a teacher.
When I was reading this section, a metaphor popped into my head. Relying entirely on the calling identity is like putting every single dollar of your life savings into one single stock.
That's dangerous.
If that company performs well, you feel great. But if that stock tanks, say you get a brutally unfair evaluation from a principal, or you have a uniquely traumatic year with a difficult cohort of students, your entire psychological net worth goes completely bankrupt.
Because it's all you have?
You have zero diversified portfolio to protect your self-esteem.
That is an exceptionally precise analogy. The theory of self-complexity, developed by psychologist Patricia Linville, posits that human knowledge about the self is healthiest and most resilient when it is represented by multiple, distinct, and varied cognitive structures, known as self-aspects.
Self-aspects, so multiple identities.
Yes, you are an educator.
Yeah.
But you are also an endurance runner. You are a devoted parent. You are an amateur musician. You are an active community advocate.
By diversifying your identity portfolio, you build a psychological firewall.
A firewall, yes.
If you have a devastatingly terrible Tuesday at school, the teacher aspect of your identity takes a hit, but you still have the runner identity and the musician identity intact to fall back on, allowing you to still feel competent, worthy, and grounded.
High self-complexity acts as a vital psychological buffer during times of severe, prolonged stress. If your identity is entirely subsumed by your profession, an occupational stressor is not just a bad day at work, it is internalized as a devastating existential blow to your core self-worth.
The dossier also layers in Higgies' self-discrepancy theory here, which I found fascinating. It looks at the friction between the actual self, the ideal self, and the ought self.
Yes. We're constantly subconsciously evaluating our actual self, who we really are, against our ideal self, who we wish to be, and the ought self, who we believe society demands we be.
The ought self is a heavy burden.
Society demands that teachers be perfect, infinitely patient, selfless martyrs who sacrifice their own well-being for the children. When that oppressive ought self dominates an individual's psyche, the resulting cognitive dissonance breeds severe anxiety and depressive symptoms.
So the summer break is not just about resting your body. It is the vital, mandatory opportunity to intentionally shed the suffocating teacher persona.
You have to step out of it.
You have to use those months to actively resurrect your dormant identities, to expand your self-complexity, and fortify your psychological resilience before you return to the pressure cooker in September.
While hobbies, boundary management, and identity reconstruction rebuild the psychological self, the dossier also outlines an incredibly specific, biologically validated intervention designed to rapidly reboot the physical self.
Yes, let's look at the actual clinical interventions for flushing the inflammation out of the body. We are talking about forest bathing, and then we have to tackle perhaps the most terrifying concept in this entire research file: defeating vacation fare out.
Let's start with the physical healing. The practice of Shinrin-yoku.
Shinrin-yoku.
Shinrin-yoku is a practice that originated in Japan in the 1980s. It translates directly to taking in the forest atmosphere, or forest bathing.
Forest bathing.
It is crucial to understand that this is not simply hiking. It is not treating the forest as a scenic treadmill for strenuous cardiovascular exercise.
So you aren't trying to burn calories.
No, it is about slow, deliberate sensory immersion in a dense, natural forested environment.
When I first heard the term forest bathing, I admit I wrote it off as a nice, poetic, slightly woo-woo concept.
A lot of people do.
But the dossier brings the hard science. This isn't just about feeling peaceful. It acts directly on the autonomic nervous system to physically repair that broken, blunted HPA axis we analyzed earlier.
The empirical physiological outcomes are incredibly striking. From an evolutionary biology perspective, the human physiological system evolved and adapted over millions of years to natural arboreal settings.
Meaning we are built for the forest.
Our brains are hardwired to recognize the forest as an environment of baseline safety. When you walk in nature mindfully, utilizing all 5 senses, the visual and auditory inputs directly reduce the activation of the brain's amygdala, the core fear and alarm center that has been hyperactive all year.
And when the amygdala finally quiets down, what is the downstream effect on the body?
The silencing of the amygdala signals the HPA axis to dramatically downregulate the stress hormone cascade.
It turns off the cortisol?
Clinical studies measuring participants before and after Shinrin-yoku show that salivary cortisol levels drop significantly. Pulse rates decrease. Blood pressure normalizes.
You can actually measure it.
You successfully inhibit the sympathetic fight-or-flight nervous activity and markedly enhance the parasympathetic rest and digest nervous activity. You're manually switching the nervous system from survival mode to repair mode.
And then there's the chemical aspect of the trees themselves, the phytoncides. I found this absolutely mind-blowing. The trees are literally medicating you.
Yes, phytoncides.
What are they?
Phytoncides are antimicrobial volatile organic compounds emitted by trees and plants to protect themselves from insects and rotting.
So the trees release them into the air.
When humans breathe in the forest air, we inhale these compounds. Exposure to phytoncides has been clinically proven to significantly aid in the recovery of the human immune system by drastically increasing the number and the activity of natural killer, or NK, immune cells.
And the NK cells are the ones that hunt down viruses and tumors.
Exactly.
So inhaling these tree compounds directly counters the severe immunosuppressive effects of the chronic burnout we discussed earlier.
It heals the immune system.
It is a clinically validated intervention for endocrine and immunological rehabilitation. Dedicating specific extended intervals during the summer for immersive nature walks is not a leisure activity. It is a clinical necessity for repairing cellular damage.
It is one of the most effective, accessible tools we have for physiological baseline resetting.
Okay, so you do the work. You survive the June crash. You set your temporal fences. You master woodworking to build self-complexity. You spend hours walking in the pine forest, and your cortisol is finally balanced. You feel human again.
You're fully recovered.
And then the dossier delivers a devastating plot twist. We have to address vacation fade-out.
This is the critical, often ignored caveat to everything we have discussed today.
It's so depressing.
The restorative potential of a vacation or a summer break is immense. However, empirical research, specifically leaning on a landmark meta-analysis conducted by organizational psychologist Jessica DeBloom, demonstrates that the psychological and physiological benefits of a vacation are highly ephemeral.
They don't last?
They fade out extraordinarily quickly upon returning to work.
How quickly are we talking? Give it to me straight.
For the vast majority of workers across all sectors, the positive effects on exhaustion levels, mood, and somatic health complaints vanish within a matter of days.
These days.
The benefits almost entirely dissipate between 12 days and 1 month after re-entering the work environment.
Wait, just to make sure I am wrapping my head around this. All this biological healing we just spent nearly an hour analyzing, the repaired immune system, the calmed amygdala, the restored emotional capacity, it just completely evaporates by mid-September.
Unfortunately, yes, if highly intentional strategic interventions aren't applied to protect it.
That is heartbreaking.
The standard trajectory of occupational well-being shows that a worker's health decreases steadily leading up to the break, increases sharply during the vacation, peaks just before returning, and then rapidly, steeply declines the moment they walk back into the high-demand environment.
It is like buying a house that is completely infested with termites. You spend all summer putting on a beautiful, expensive, fresh coat of paint, fixing the roof and polishing the floors. It looks brand new.
But you didn't fix the problem.
You didn't actually exterminate the termites. The moment September hits, the termites just resume eating the house from the inside out, and within 3 weeks, the structure is collapsing again. And the research notes a really depressing detail. A longer vacation doesn't even fix this. A massive 23-day vacation doesn't yield longer-lasting post-vacation benefits than a shorter one. The fade-out happens just as fast. How do we stop the termites? How do we protect the healing?
The science of occupational recovery offers several strategic interventions designed specifically to delay this fade-out effect. The first and most accessible is the practice of savoring.
Savoring, it sounds like holding on to a memory. How does that work biologically?
It is the deliberate psychological practice of consciously attending to and prolonging positive experiences.
So intentionally remembering the good times.
By actively reliving the joyful memories of the summer break,
Ah.
through extensive conversations with colleagues, writing in a journal, or intentionally reviewing photographs, you actually neurologically reactivate the positive affective states you experienced during the trip.
Oh, wow.
The brain processes the memory of the joy, which sustains a mild version of the physiological benefits, keeping the cortisol at bay just a little longer.
The next intervention the dossier outlines is leisure maintenance. This sounds incredibly difficult to pull off once the chaos of September hits.
It is difficult, but it is statistically the most effective buffer against fade-out. Leisure maintenance means aggressively refusing to abandon your restorative summer activities once the work resumes.
So don't drop your hobbies.
If you started taking evening walks or reading fiction during the summer, you must maintain those habits. Most importantly, you must ensure that weekends during the first critical months of the school year remain strictly non-work segmented periods. Engaging in structured evening relaxation protocols dramatically slows the decline in well-being.
And then there is graduated reentry. This is essentially throttling your engagement upon your return, which is completely antithetical to the modern work culture, right? Bosses want you returning at 110% capacity, rested, and ready to crush it on day one.
But biologically, immediate work overload is a severe shock to a newly rested nervous system. It wipes out the holiday benefits instantly, plunging the individual straight back into sympathetic arousal.
It undoes all the work.
Educators and all professionals must intentionally throttle their engagement. Do not volunteer for new administrative committees in week 1. Do not stay until 6 p.m. during the initial back-to-school and service days. You must ruthlessly protect the reentry phase and slowly ramp up your capacity.
The dossier also emphasizes the absolute necessity of eradicating rumination. It reminds us of a fundamental flaw in human biology. The body cannot distinguish between a future perceived threat and an active present one.
It thinks a thought is real.
If you are sitting at home on a Sunday night in September, agonizing and ruminating over a highly difficult class you have to teach on Monday morning, your body thinks you are in physical danger right now. The cortisol floods the system before the threat even arrives.
Exactly. Mindfulness techniques, cognitive behavioral strategies, and actively redirecting thoughts are essential to stop the rumination loop and keep the biological recovery mechanisms active for as long as possible.
I want to highlight one final point from the dossier because I think it is crucial for administrators, principals, and corporate managers to hear. It is the concept of delayed creativity.
Yes, there is a common managerial expectation that employees will return from vacation bursting with innovative ideas and maximum productivity on their first day back.
Right, everyone expects you to be a genius on Monday.
But the cognitive data shows that the benefits of resting do not peak on day 1. Employees do not perceive their highest levels of creativity or problem-solving capability upon their immediate return.
When does it happen?
The positive neurological changes actually manifest and peak roughly 2 weeks after the vacation ends.
So if a manager overloads a worker with high-stakes tasks on day 1, they're actively destroying the creativity they're hoping to harvest.
You're completely ruining the process.
It really underscores the need for a gentle, protected reintegration into the work environment rather than hitting the ground sprinting.
It demands a systemic shift in how we structure the return to work.
Let's synthesize this incredible journey we have been on today because we have covered massive ground.
We really have.
We have learned that occupational burnout is not simply a subjective feeling of needing a nap. It is a measurable, devastating somatic condition characterized by hypocortisolism, a shattered HPA axis, and systemic cellular inflammation.
It is biological damage.
We learned that the immobilizing summer malaise is actually a severe neurological withdrawal from a 9-month bender of chronic stress hormones.
And we established that true recovery is not a passive event. It requires militant boundary management, strict segmentation to achieve actual psychological detachment.
We have to work to rest.
It requires diverse, active leisure engagement to satisfy the psychological needs outlined in the drama model. It demands active identity rebuilding to increase self-complexity and protect our self-worth.
Building that firewall.
And finally, it requires highly strategic interventions upon returning to work to prevent the rapid, devastating fade-out of those hard-won biological benefits.
So, connecting this all back to you, the listener. Whether you are a teacher staring down the barrel of May, desperately holding on until the final bell, or you are a professional navigating any high-demand, high-stress career,
This applies to everyone listening.
I want you to look at your own calendar. Look at your upcoming time off, whether it is a 3-month summer or a 1-week trip to the mountains. Are you treating that time as an indulgent perk?
Just a little treat.
Are you planning to use it just to catch up on household chores, answer just a few emails, and run errands? Or are you finally ready to treat it as a strict clinical necessity for your neuroendocrine system?
It's a medical intervention.
Are you going to build a fortress around your time to allow your cells to actually heal?
It requires a profound, somewhat uncomfortable shift in personal perspective. We have to move away from viewing rest as a reward for productivity and begin viewing it as a non-negotiable biological imperative for survival.
It really is a matter of survival, and I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive into the human toll of work.
Okay.
We have just established that an expansive multi-month period of pure detachment, intentional boundary setting, identity reconstruction, and deep physiological recovery is barely enough to temporarily repair the damage of a 9-month professional sprint.
It just barely gets you back to baseline.
If that is true, what does that tell us about the foundational sustainability of the modern work environment as a whole? Are we actually working to live, or have we designed a society where we are simply resting just enough to survive more work?
Resonance talks. Tune